everybody to the latest IMAP webinar, the second in a series on how to build an effective client solution with managed accounts. And today we're going to be focusing on MDAs. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's session, Shane Hawke, the head of the Portfolio Advisory Service for Oreana. And now I'd like to hand over to Shane to introduce the topic and our guest presenters for today. Shane, thanks very much.
Thank you, Toby. Welcome to the second webinar of a two-part series, Where Do I Start? My name's Shane Hawke, Head of Research and Advisory at Oreana Portfolio Advisory, which is an institutional-grade outsourced investment consulting and CIO service. As a division of Oreana Financial Services, we make available services to both Oreana as well as independent financial advisors for their asset consulting and investment management needs. In particular, we work with advisors on their investment philosophies, committees, asset allocation, manager selection, portfolio construction, and communication needs. We also make available our services via BT, as well as a range of other implementation options. Through our work, we've identified managed accounts as a key area to consider in continuously improving investment governance. But given there is a range of implementation options available, we believe there is no one-size-fits-all solution. With options including model portfolios, SMAs, MDAs, there is no shortage of choice of implementation, which brings us to the webinar series that we've made available this week. Our aim over this two-part series is to help advisors continue to learn more about the implementation choices available, the benefits of moving up the efficiency curve and improving investment governance for the benefit of both their clients and their practice. It's with great pleasure for me to introduce the presenters for today, who'll be going through a short presentation each before we open to Q&A at the end of each of the presentations. First up, we have Zac Leman, BT Head of Managed Accounts. Second, we've got Brett Sanders, CEO of Philo Capital. And third, we have Dr. Isaac Poole, Global CIO of Oreana Portfolio Advisory. Welcome and thank you to each of the presenters. So just with the logistics of the day, you will see that there is a Q&A section on the screen there. Type away a question if you have. We will look to either answer it throughout the presentation, but I can assure you there'll be quite a bit of time at the end for us to answer questions then. Okay, let's get started and over to you, Zac. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane and Toby, for the invitation to participate in today's session. There's no doubt managed accounts are as, if not more popular than ever, and they're continuing to grow year on year as the benefits they provide to clients and advisors become more self-evident. It's now widely accepted that managed accounts provide advisors and clients a range of benefits. However, in an environment of increasing regulation and compliance with the associated costs, what has been a real game changer for many advisors is the realisation of the efficiency benefits that they deliver. Managed accounts in many ways have simplified the way advisors manage client investments and allowed them to achieve greater efficiency and scale by reducing the administration burden and cost of managing clients' investment portfolios. Managed accounts in their various forms provide the means for advisors to exercise varying degrees of discretion over the client's investments. As long as the portfolios are managed within an agreed investment mandate or investment program, then the portfolios can be managed without the need to issue a record advice to each client each time a change is made. This means that investment research and many other functions such as implementation and execution can be centralised and applied consistently across all clients rather than on an individual client basis. So just go to that next slide, Toby, please. Advancements in managed account technology on platforms has made managed accounts far more accessible and also opened up the means by which managed accounts can be delivered, which is great for advisors as they can now choose a managed account offer which suits them and their clients. But this also presents a challenge, trying to work out which offer is right for me and where do I start, being some of them. Broadly speaking, there's really only 4 or 5 ways to manage clients' portfolios. All of these can be considered in context of the amount of discretion they provide against the efficiency they deliver through the centralisation of investment management, with greater discretion generally providing increased centralisation and greater efficiency benefits. When considering which one of these offers is suitable, a good way to start is to consider how involved in the investment process you want to be and who should or will have discretion over your clients' portfolios. Largely, this will be a factor of how you want to position yourself in the process and what is your investment capability. As in, do you want or need to be the investment manager, or do you want to outsource either partially or in full the investment capability? How much work you actually want to do. Are you doing the asset allocation, asset selection, research, implementation and trade execution? Or again, outsourcing in part or in full some of these operations. And then how involved do you want your clients to be, or how involved do they expect to be in the investment decision making or approvals? There's obviously not going to be a single answer to these questions, and it may obviously differ from one advisor or client to the next. But what's important is to put in place the structures that are going to work for the needs of your business and clients. So let's take a look at the different ways of managing money in the context of discretion over investments and the centralisation of investment management or efficiency that they deliver. It's shown in the part with discretion across the horizontal axis and the centralisation of management on the vertical axis. On the extreme left, and offering the least amount of discretion, is investor-maintained portfolios, which is where a client manages their own portfolio and places their own trades. As an advisor, you generally have little to no control over this, and to be fair, probably little overhead. Obviously, this is not a managed account, but can play an important part for some clients and often sits alongside a managed account, allowing clients to exercise some of their own discretion over their investment outcomes. At the other end of the spectrum, at the far right, is professionally managed SMAs, where, like a managed fund, investment management is completely outsourced to the SMA manager. As an advisor, you choose from a range of off-the-shelf investment options to suit your clients' needs. Clients receive the benefits of professional management and all the benefits associated with managed accounts. The SMA is offered as a product through a PDS, and other than the initial advice, there's very little advisor needs to do to maintain the investment. SMAs suit a wide range of clients and don't require the advisor or licensee to have any particular investment capability and provide a really scalable solution, particularly useful for smaller balanced clients. However, they do allow little scope to customise the offer to suit an advisor's client base, so it may not suit an advisor or licensee who's looking to tailor an offer to their own clients. Offering advisors some control or influence over the client portfolios, coming back to the left-hand side of the chart, is the more traditional non-discretionary arrangements where, through the use of models, advisors can centralise some of the portfolio management processes. But this still comes with a relatively high compliance and admin burden. Portfolio changes generally require an ROA and client consent to proceed, so the efficient implementation can be impacted by, among other things, clients' ability or desire to respond in a timely manner. By leveraging a platform's digital capability to produce and deliver ROAs and receive client consent, advisors can scale this offer. However, it still requires managing and implementing changes on an individual basis, which can take time relative to an SMA or an MDA arrangement. In saying this, though, utilising the digital tools can get advisors as close to the managed account experience as possible without the need to access an MDA or SMA. We found this offer is particularly attractive for managing larger clients, requiring more bespoke portfolios where advisors can afford to provide a high-touch service. We've also seen significant growth in this offer for advisors who don't have the ability to or desire to manage client portfolios with discretion, but they still want to efficiently manage and implement model portfolios across a smaller range of clients. Now, to truly start to centralise portfolio management across your clients and benefit from the efficiencies of managed accounts, then a higher level of discretion is generally needed, along with an investment capability that's either in-house or outsourced, which is shown here as we head across and up the curves when we start to look at MDAs and SMAs. If an advisor has or intends to obtain an MDA authority, then there are tools available to help facilitate their own practice or advisor-based discretionary models. Advisors use the MDA to implement an agreed investment program without the need for ongoing client consent. Portfolio changes can be implemented across the client base simultaneously and in a timely manner, leading to better execution and hopefully better performance outcomes. because the MDA can be tailored to a client or a group of client needs and provided the MDA is operated within the defined parameters of the investment program, then there's a lot of flexibility and the advisors have that full discretion. And finally, comparable to professionally managed SMAs, a licensee or practice can use an MDA or an SMA to build their own, what we refer to as dealer portfolios or models. This can be done utilising their own in-house investment capability or partnering with an external asset consultant or investment manager. This can be structured a number of ways, with the dealer insourcing all investment management, where they have the necessary skills and resources to do so. Or what we're seeing more often now is licensees partnering with a consultant or investment manager to either white label an offer tailored to the requirements of the dealer and its client base, or to add investment capability and expertise to their own investment committee to issue their own portfolios. The advantage of this offer is that it not only provides efficiency and scale benefits, it allows the dealer to influence the design of the offer and to best meet the needs of its clients. By centralising the portfolio management and execution, it can also manage many of the inherent risks associated with advisors implementing individual client portfolios. And for the advisor, they effectively outsource the administration and investment governance obligations, reducing the cost to manage and service each client. So ultimately, for the end client, the outcome should really be the same, regardless of which approach is taken. They receive a professionally managed portfolio, implemented efficiently and effectively. If we just go to the next slide, Toby. So what are some of the considerations that will inform how to best implement a managed account offer, or which type of offer? I think first and foremost, there's a question around client best interests and the ethical considerations to be considered, which in relation to offering managed accounts are, I think, largely encapsulated in a number of the FASEA ethical values, particularly those of competence and diligence. They're all important and relevant principles, but for me, when it comes to selecting a managed account and managed account offer, the value of diligence becomes a significant obligation. It requires that advisors exercise due care and skill in the way that they do a number of things, such as engaging in and understanding each client's needs, developing strategies and solutions and recommendations, developing product and service solutions, and ensuring that strategy and product solutions provided are fit for purpose and intended to improve clients' financial well-being. Advisors also need to consider competence and really question whether they are appropriately skilled and resourced to deliver the service, such as investment management, to clients, and if needed, be willing to engage the help of professionals to help build the solutions they need. So flexibility is needed to choose the offer that allows for a level of customisation and to allow for input potentially from external parties. This may mean having a sufficiently diverse APL to meet the needs of clients, or leveraging the flexibility of an MDA offer to tailor a range of portfolios to meet your specific client needs. I've already mentioned investment capability. This is going to be a big factor in determining the type of managed account offer or offered. Generally, if issuing a managed portfolio through an SMA or a third-party MDA provider, then the issuer will expect a high level of investment capability and governance, which, if not met through internal capability, will definitely require assistance from an outsourced investment partner or a consultant. While no less important, implementing through your own licensee's MDA or implementing through a non-discretionary model will generally carry a lower governance burden, but it's generally a more consultative approach implemented in conjunction with the client. Looking at clients, the composition of your client base is another important factor to consider. Generally speaking, managed accounts are suitable for a wide range of clients, but it may be that high net worth or SMSF clients with bespoke needs require a tailored solution implemented through a non-discretionary or an MDA offer. Or smaller retail clients may not necessarily suit an MDA offer due to the additional advice requirements or required to review the appropriateness of the investment program annually, and may be more suited to an off-the-shelf SMA. The authority and consent layer. This talks to to how discretion is granted by the client to manage the portfolio, or the way consent to trade is given. An MDA relies on a contractual arrangement between the client and MDA provider, which gives the MDA provider authority and discretion to implement the investment program. The MDA is very closely linked to the advice process, and due to the requirement to review the advice annually, provides advisors with a great opportunity to engage with their clients and to ensure that the portfolio continues to meet their needs. If relying on client consent, then advisors obviously don't have discretion. However, they are likely to engage much more frequently with clients, which may not be suitable for lower balance clients. The investment style, working around, will really dictate the investment capability required to manage the portfolios. For a passive risk-based suite of portfolios investing in unlisted passive funds, it may be possible to partner with a research house to just provide the strategic asset allocation for each risk profile. However, a more active approach is going to not only need input from an asset allocation, but also asset research and portfolio construction capability, which may need to come from a specialist asset consultant. Given that managed accounts provide significantly more transparency than traditional investment options, it goes without saying that you need to consider how you will engage and communicate with clients. There is potential for the increased transparency to increase calls and queries from clients, but if managed well, then this is a real opportunity to engage with clients on a much deeper level on their investments and their portfolios. The final couple of considerations, one is the distribution strategy. So once you've built an investment capability, will it only be available to clients of the dealer or licensee? Typically this is the case, and models will generally be only offered through a closed menu or a private label offer. Distributing this capability to other licensees may be an aspiration and will require careful consideration of how the investment management capability is structured. And then finally, there's remuneration, which is a significant consideration. And is there an expectation that you will be paid for the services that are being provided? Generally, we're now seeing groups move away from being paid for this, and they are looking at managed accounts for the efficiency benefits they deliver to business, as opposed to being used as a separate revenue lever. It is possible to be paid, however, consideration should be given to the appropriateness of the payment under FOFA and best interest, and to ensure that the payment is commensurate with the service that's being provided. So there's a lot to consider. I think, though, the point is that, and part of what today is about, is to really highlight that the tools and support are available to help you determine what is right for you. And I would strongly encourage anyone going down this path to discuss their options with any of us on the call today. We'd all be more than happy to help you make sense of it all. So thank you. Back to you, Shane.
Thanks, Zac. Really insightful presentation. Thank you. And we're going to move forward now to Brett Sanders.
Thank you, Shane, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So Philo is an MDA provider. We spend a lot of time talking to advisors in the marketplace, and part of my brief today was really to answer three questions, or to address three questions. So advisor trends in managed accounts, and for the advisors that have joined us today, what are your peers doing? What are they thinking about as they engage with this question of managed accounts, and how might they implement them? Secondly, how are advisors typically using MDAs, managed discretionary accounts, in their practices? And thirdly, how do I get started, if I want to explore the managed accounts question? So we'll address each in turn. The first of them, advisor trends. I'll just scoot across these, given there's a few there, but these are the 10 that readily came to mind. So use of model portfolios, that's a factor when we're talking to advisor groups. Many of them already have model portfolios in place, but those who don't are seeing it as part of the implementation. So it's the centralisation of portfolio management. And I think it's this desire to have clients of a similar risk profile have their portfolios, looking more the same. That people are obviously quite concerned about the idea that you have clients of the same risk profile with vastly different looking portfolios and different performance characteristics, that feels like a vulnerability in their business. Second point is, and as touched on by Zac, growing use of asset consultants to build those models, not just buying a research subscription, but engaging an asset consultant to help build out a set of models that suit that particular practice. That can be done as a bespoke arrangement where you have your own ideas about what you want those models to look like. You want to implement your own investment philosophy, but equally there are off-the-shelf versions available in the MDA world as well. If that's not as important to you and you don't want to spend as much time monitoring and managing asset consultants in your practice. Third thing we're seeing there is this focus on asset allocation. Historically, in my time in financial services, advisors have tended to rely on strategic asset allocation that they rebalance to periodically, and that has probably been a more dominant model than having a more dynamic or tactical approach. With the advent of managed accounts, people start to say, well, hey, I can rebalance as often as I like. It doesn't cost my practice anything to do it. It can be done quickly. It can be done equitably. So people start to lift the prominence of asset allocation in their discussion with clients, and they're starting to focus on that as both a risk management tool and a way of accessing opportunity in markets. So lots more discussion about the importance of asset allocation and the fact that it is a relatively a bigger driver of returns than asset selection. Segment-based services is the next trend, and what we're seeing is advice practices thinking about their client base and chunking them out into segments and then saying, what's the right investment solution for each? So this ultimately ends up in having, in many cases, separate sets of model portfolios to deal with the needs of different segments. So I think early on in the managed accounts, in terms of the trend to managed accounts, what we saw was, 5 models, and every client's one of those 5. That's not what we're seeing so much anymore. People saying, okay, I've got some more highly engaged clients. They want a set of models. It might be different from those that are a bit more passive, or want to separate between what I give to my accumulators versus what I give to my retirees. Or it may be that I've got people who are more comfortable with direct equities, and some would prefer to have portfolios all constructed of managed funds. You get all sorts of combinations, but you can build services around segments and have your managed accounts encapsulate that. The next trend is around ESG, and what we're seeing there simply is that it is becoming more mainstream. We're seeing practices that have been running model portfolios for some while, and that their clients are coming to them, and not necessarily the clients they might have expected, and saying, we think it's time that we started to think about how we invest our capital and whether we're comfortable with it from an ESG point of view. So it is becoming more mainstream, and we've got practices that have been running models for some while now saying, hey, we'd like to add 2 or 3 new models. So we're doing this for one practice in Melbourne at the moment, and they can add 3 ESG models to the range that they've already got. It's very quick and easy to do, but it gives them that ability to address that emerging need in their client base. Moving down to that bottom line and the professional services approach, we're obviously seeing a lot of practices come out of institutions in the last couple of years, really strong focus on advice, as opposed to product distribution type focus. These are practices that really want to be known for their professional services approach, and for them it's about building out their story. What do they believe in terms of investment? How do they execute their role? What controls and balances do they have in place so that they can tell their story to their clients without it necessarily having to be the story of them as the portfolio manager, but to explain their role as advisors and as people carrying out a watching brief on the various parties that they engage with. Trend after that is this focus on business strategy. Historically, when people have been sort of, one way to look at a managed account would be to say, well, that's a new, akin to introducing a new fund manager into your practice, or maybe even a new platform. But what we're seeing is people taking a much broader view. They're stepping back and saying, what's the value that we add as a practice? What do we want to be known for with our clients? What will we therefore outsource, and what will we insource? And in particular, how do we set our business up to be more efficient, to treat our clients more equitably, and ultimately to have a more sustainable and valuable practice over the long haul? So it's a broader picture where the managed account selection has to fit within that overall strategy rather than happening independently of it. The governance and compliance piece is really just that people are obviously much more sensitive to compliance today. It's a tougher compliance environment. I think, the Royal Commission just served to reinforce that, but it was already there. And advisors are sort of, we're seeing them, they're conscious of vulnerabilities where they feel that they need to improve their compliance performance. On the governance side, probably felt that their investment committees haven't really been as robust or as organised as they could be, and they want to tighten all of that up. And so that tends to come with the introduction of managed accounts, and that the efficiency dividend that the managed account gives them also gives them a bit more time to focus on those things. The next point, awareness of managed account choices. I think, if you look at it in terms of marketing dollar, obviously we've seen massive amounts spent on the promotion and distribution that sits around SMAs. And I think as the market has developed, people's awareness of managed discretionary accounts has increased. People are understanding that there are some very distinct differences between SMAs and MDAs, and that they are tools that, because of their differences, have a best use in each case, and that there's more awareness of what the best use of those vehicles might be. And I think there's more awareness that an MDA can play a very, very valuable role. So people are actually coming to us with a bit more knowledge and keen to learn about those differences and understand what that might mean for them. Finally, the advisor as ringmaster, if we go back to the first point about model portfolio construction centralizing, it means that portfolio construction comes off the job description of the advisor. But what gets added back onto it is this, the coordination role becomes more significant when you've got all these various providers. And it's not just within the managed account context. I'm talking about people looking at holistic advice, and we're certainly seeing a number of the clients and prospects that we deal with that are engaging with, people like Astute Wheel and others about, how they provide a more holistic service, with investment being part of that. So they're the trends we're seeing. We might move on. Next slide, please, Toby, if we could. So in this slide, this is to answer that question: how are people incorporating MDA into a practice? Look, honestly, the answers to that vary enormously according to the practice and their circumstances. If we come back to this point about a solution fitting into the business's strategy, to the extent that each business has their own strategy, then how you use the managed account will vary accordingly. But a couple of points to make in this diagram, looking at it here. So at the top, you'll see that, the advice practice itself, adopting a broad governance role. Then underneath that, Philo as an MDA provider may be providing a number of solutions to them, but it's not necessarily covering all of their needs as a practice. It can have a choice of platforms, and for many practices, in this diagram, it's only one platform, but we've got clients who are, saying, well, ultimately, I want to be able to express these portfolios through multiple platforms, or to have the ability to do that if I acquire another practice, for example. And that's certainly possible in the managed account world. In terms of client types, it depends on how you choose to segment them. In this example here, we've got client types where it's separated by the size of the portfolio and the sort of level of engagement and the sort of assets that they have. But it might equally be, you know, super versus non-super, retiree versus non-retiree. It's what is meaningful to the practice. But having done that segmentation to say, what's the proposition I would like to provide to each? Now, in this example, we've got small and less engaged clients operating under an SMA because there's no annual advice obligation for an SMA in the way there is with an MDA. So that suits very well. I have to say every single one of the client firms we deal with uses SMAs as well as MDAs. And then, you know, propositions where the portfolios vary by size. So the small and maybe more cost-conscious client segment using index funds with a dynamic asset allocation program. Then the medium to large, where you have, again, dynamic asset allocation. You can have active funds. You can also introduce direct equities into the portfolio if you'd like. And then finally, you may have large and more complex clients where the MDA might be the core of their holding, but they may have some other assets outside. So it might be they've got some shares that they want to hold in a different sleeve on the platform, for example, because of tax considerations. It might be they've got some direct property, and you know, you look at those things holistically when you're thinking about risk profile and asset allocation. But you know, those issues can be accommodated. Typically, in terms of the number of sector or multi-asset class portfolio options, most people are doing 4 or 5 portfolios across the risk profile, but that can be tailored to suit. And when it comes to single sector options, pretty common to have a direct Australian shares single sector option, but you know, some people don't have that at all if they're not using direct equity. We do have a couple that have, for example, a single sector option for fixed income or international equity as well. But the point is, you build this picture to suit your own needs and practice, and that it's not a one size fits all, and that we're seeing 2 different kinds of managed account in use there, SMA and MDA. And then people might use the active portfolio, for example, as the basis of, you know, the portfolio they would use if they were constructing it manually and making their adjustments through ROA in the traditional way, so that they've still got, you know, one story about what the, you know, the best portfolio looks like, and they can reuse their client communications for those people who decide that a discretionary arrangement is not for them. So final slide, if we could please, Toby. So getting started, I mean, I think with what Zac took you through, there was a bit of detail on where he went around the clock there to, you know, cover off quite a few issues that you might want to think about. I've sort of raised, you know, a number of issues there in that first slide about advisor trends and what people are thinking about. I think you could be forgiven for being a little overwhelmed, you know, thinking, well, how do I, you know, do all of this? This might be the sort of exercise I only go through once in every 10 or 20 years with my business, and it seems a lot to sort of bite off. And what we'd say is that, you know, reinforcing the point Zac made, I think there is help available. From our point of view, we spend a lot of time with people just sitting down around a table. What is it that you're trying to achieve with your business? Understanding the drivers there, the nature of the client base, etc., and just collaborating around what a design might look like that would be suitable for your business, and spending some time to you know, bat the questions backwards and forwards to be able to help people navigate this. So what I'm saying is you don't need to be expert in all of this. People like ourselves can help you work through that. where you don't have all the skills that you need internally, we can help you find those additional competencies. So, helping people, for example, run an evaluation process to find the right asset consultant for them. That's something we've done a lot of times. Other times people already know who they'd like to use, and we simply appoint them to the service. And then finally, building out the service and working with advice firms on the change process, including training and developing of the client-facing collateral that's needed, and implementation, rollout programs, all those sorts of things. You can get help with that as well from us and others. So I hope that's been helpful, just to give you a bit of an idea. And at that point, I will pass back to Shane. Thanks, Shane.
Thanks, Brett. Yeah, again, some really great insights there into what to think about. Look, we've got some questions that are coming through, and really appreciate that. Just a reminder that we have a Q&A just down at the bottom of your screen, and feel free to send your questions to us. We have some questions there, which I'm going to hold on to until after Isaac's section. So I'll now hand over to Isaac. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Shane, and thanks everyone. And well, thanks Zac and Brett. I think what we've seen is a really great start and a great job setting out some of the really critical and key issues that advisors and businesses are going to face if they're considering managed accounts. And one thing that really comes through for me is that this shouldn't be taken lightly, obviously. Achieving successful outcomes for clients is going to require really good policies, really strong processes, and great resources and people to help achieve those outcomes. And obviously we ran a session on Monday, and some of you may have joined that, and effectively using policies and processes and people and resources and technology to achieve an outcome for a client is the very definition of governance, in our opinion. And that requirement for a clear governance framework and a really clear understanding of how governance works is so important when you start thinking about managed accounts. And it's important because governance, by its definition, is absolutely focused on achieving investment objectives for your clients. There's some difficulties, though. The difficulties are that governance is not an easy topic to get a handle on. There's not really a prescriptive guidance or a prescriptive set of pathways from regulators or from other sources widely available to people out there that tell you, do this to build a good governance framework, or do that to build great governance outcomes for your clients. You sort of left a little bit fumbling around in the dark, really just hoping that you can come up with something and settle on a good governance framework, and somehow that's going to work really neatly with your decision on managed accounts or with investing clients' money, and that's a problem. It's a problem because we know from empirical studies and from practical experience, and all of us know as investment professionals, that good governance really is a driver of long-term returns. That is, good governance frameworks add value to clients over the long run, and bad governance frameworks destroy value. They destroy returns, and it's a big number that you can potentially add or lose. The research is telling us that it's somewhere between 100 and 300 basis points per year that the good governance can contribute to long-term returns for your clients, and that's something that's worth spending time on and worth getting right, and acknowledging that it's a really critical part of how you implement, whether it's through a managed account or through a model portfolio, as Zac and Brett have discussed. How the size of the return that you can get on governance and the type of governance that you can implement is a function of what we call your investment governance budget. And And that budget is a function of the time that you as investment professionals have to spend on governance and the expertise that you have in the area of governance and the ability of your business to efficiently and effectively implement that framework consistently through time. And that's the governance budget. And the higher the budget, the better the outcomes and the more consistent the outcomes. Our experience is basically being that there's a lot of time and a lot of capability in the businesses we work with. So the third of these, the organisational effectiveness is really high in Australia. The profession is moving that way, but there's been more of a struggle with acknowledging the first of these two, the time and the expertise that's needed, and they really are critical, because if you get them wrong, if you don't spend enough time, if you don't have the right internal expertise, or you don't outsource to the right external expertise, that governance budget can fall away very quickly, and it can really destroy value. So if we go to the next slide, where we think we can help is, and how we think about this is acknowledging that it's really critical to have a comprehensive governance framework that really clearly links your investment beliefs to your investment and your investment philosophy to your investment objectives, and then links your investment objectives to outcomes through your investment processes. And that's the very minimum that you require. So if you did join us on Monday, you'll remember that the level of governance required to show you're running managed accounts clearly in the best interest is really the same as the governance that you'd expect to find at an institutional fund manager. And that's not easy to do at every business, because you may not have the time or the expertise. And governance isn't a set and forget. It's a process of continuous improvement. But to get that continuous improvement, you need to know what the process is to start off with, and you need to be able to implement that clear framework right from the start. And this slide is our attempt to sort of case study a good governance process. And you can see that there's a wheel there. It's a process. It's continuous. It's ongoing. And from our experience, we've sat down and worked through this entire process. We think it's comprehensive, it's clear, it's broad, and it's deep. And we've worked through this with several clients now. And what I'd point out as being really critical here is that there doesn't need to be a starting point, but often we find that the starting point is mission and objectives. And that starts with thinking about your investment beliefs and your investment philosophy and asking, are they clear? Do you know them really clearly? Do you know them inside out? Do your clients know them? Do they clearly link through to your processes? Are they clearly reflected in your portfolios? These questions begin with identifying the beliefs, and we've run a lot of workshops over the last few months, helping to identify philosophy and beliefs, not ours, but the client's individual ones, and where they're a little bit fuzzy, helping them to firm them up and really work through that process. We also spend time thinking a lot about risk and return and timeframe objectives, and having all of those is a bare minimum, we think, to managing any portfolio, but certainly managing managed accounts. But it's surprising how often they're overlooked, or how often they're not particularly clear, and instead they're sort of sat below a risk profiling tool that purports to capture all of that. That's not really the case from a really good governance framework in our view. We also look at portfolio reviews. We can conduct dynamic asset allocation and help to build frameworks for managing those. There's manager review and selection, and investment committee charters and representation, and commentary and performances. And each of these is a critical element of a broader framework. And each of these can take a lot of time to get right, a lot of time to build up from scratch if you don't have that expertise internally. And without each one of those, the process can fall apart and the framework can fall apart, and you're left with an investment intention that never really gets off the ground because the framework's not there. On this slide, we've also got a whole lot of sub-elements of each of the steps around the governance framework. And you can see why the investment governance budget is so critical, because there's lots of them. And doing all of them takes time, and doing all of them within a reasonable time takes a lot of expertise and experience, and pulling them together to get the best outcomes for clients isn't that easy. And it's something that is critical. So going back to that governance budget, it really is important to sit down and identify the budget you have available internally, or the governance budget you can access externally, and make sure that that's working for you as you start down the path of managed accounts. And it's sort of along those points, once you've thought about the investment governance budget and you've taken good stock of your internal resources, your external resources, your ability to access all of those, it's then that you can really start delving into those questions of insourcing versus outsourcing. Is it better to hire a governance expert? Do you need a complete asset consultant, or just parts of this? Can you manage the investment decision-making yourself internally? Do you have that investment expertise? It's not the same as investment governance, which we touched on Monday, but it's really critical to realize they're not the same. And we've been working with groups that have done both. They've internalized some of these functions, they've externalized some of these functions, but critically, they're able to sit down and say, now we have all of these functions, all of these parts of the framework, all the parts of the process and the governance required, and we can carry on our path towards improving the efficiency and outcomes for our clients. So if we could jump to the next slide, what you're going to get after this webinar and during the Q&A is a sense of some of the questions you should ask yourselves and some of the points you need to think about to build out a really top-notch institutional fit-for-purpose governance framework. There isn't a lot of help out there, to be honest, from the regulators and other sources. We think it's critical. We've written a white paper recently, a governance white paper that you will receive after this webinar as part of the series. And on this final slide, I've lifted out some of the questions that we think are critical to answer when you're building out your governance framework, and we address them and think about them in that governance white paper. And the point is not to sort of concern you and say, I can't answer that question. I don't have it ready to hand. I'm miles away from the required level of governance. It's really to prompt you to reflect on governance and sort of take stock of where you are, where you'd like to be, and think about how you're going to get there. Will you insource it? Will you outsource it? And what's required before you take those next steps? And honestly, if you can't answer all of these questions pretty quickly, and if it's very difficult to answer some of them, then there's probably some work to do there, in my view. And that's where we can help, or as Brett mentioned, or Zac mentioned, there's ways you can get assistance in all of this. In closing, before I pass back to Shane, I think it is just important to re-highlight that we are looking to try and help businesses along their investment governance journey. We're looking to help people along their investment expertise journey. And we have written the white paper. I really encourage you to have a look at it. And if nothing else, hopefully this serves as a bit of a starting point, or a reflection point for businesses and advisors to consider before they start that big journey towards managed accounts. So I'll stop there and pass back to you, Shane.
Thank you, and thank you very much. Another great presentation there. We've got a number of questions that have come through, and so this is probably the first one that I'm going to ask is probably for Zac. The questions really come through around if you're a wealth management practice, and I think you did touch on some of these components, Zac, but maybe let's just reinforce some of the key things to consider. So if you are a wealth management practice and you've been running models, you've got the infrastructure in place, you've been doing ROAs, etc. What is it that you need to consider, or what is required for you to run an SMA or an MDA? In particular, what are the regulatory requirements? Is there a PDS, and does that imply that there's a responsible entity or trustee involved?
Yeah, great question. So, I can talk to it from a platform perspective, given that we're an issuer of both SMAs and we also act as an administrator and custodian for MDA providers. Look, there are certain regulatory requirements. Obviously, you can't act with discretion unless you're licensed to do that. So, to do that, you generally need to have access to an MDA, or you need to issue through an SMA. If you are issuing portfolios through an SMA, we're acting as the RE. So the things that we're looking for are as a result of our responsibility as the issuer of the portfolios. Now, we have an expectation around the capability of the investment manager, and we'll do due diligence of all managers and portfolios that are issued on our platform to ensure they meet our standards. And then we'll undertake ongoing reviews to ensure they continue to. So this will often determine how a group looks at their own investment capability and whether it's sufficient or needs to be enhanced through either uplifting processes, personnel, and the like, or whether they need to outsource some or all of those investment functions like we've talked about. So there is the option to do both. The other consideration is really around there's a cost. So there's a real and not an insignificant cost to issuing and maintaining a product through an SMA. So this includes the upfront and ongoing DD. It includes issuing a PDS and the administration required to run the portfolio. So generally, we'll look for potential demand for the portfolio to be sufficient and at scale that it's going to be a commercial outcome, because we do have to run them. We do have obligations that don't go away. They're as soon as the portfolio is live, we have those obligations. And also the investment manager themselves also needs to carry the cost of managing the portfolios in a way that meets the needs and the requirements of the RE. So they're going to need to reach a certain scale to make sense. For us, an MDA is a very different proposition. So we aren't the issuer of the portfolio, it's the MDA provider. We're simply acting as the administrator and custodian and providing the tools used by the MDA provider to implement their portfolios. So generally, the MDA is an extension of the advice process and provides licensees an efficient way to implement their client investment programs. Therefore, the obligation and governance responsibilities rests with the MDA provider, whether that's a licensee with their own MDA or whether that's through a third-party MDA provider like Philo. So that doesn't completely absolve us, and we do ensure that MDA providers are appropriately licensed and experienced to manage money on behalf of platforms. And in the case of third-party MDA providers who are acting on behalf of a number of AFSLs, we also undertake an operational due diligence process to provide greater comfort around their capabilities and processes. But I think in essence, the MDA, from our perspective, provides a lot more flexibility, and it doesn't necessarily have the same cost associated with it that an SMA may do. So scale is not necessarily a significant issue, and the size of the practices that can utilise an MDA service can be smaller. The commitment can be smaller, and they can also have much more flexibility around the number and types of portfolios that they issue. So hopefully that answers the question, gives you a bit of insight. But
yeah,
thank you.
Thank you, Zac. Now that's a really great response there. And I might have maybe to Brett. Obviously, feel free to add anything to Zac's response there. But another question, just in relation to that you may be able to help us with, is ASIC's review of MDAs. Is there an update on the status of that?
Well, yeah, going back a couple of years, I think they started a project called Platforms, and I'm sure it was MDAs or just managed accounts. But anyway, I think the last official word on that was back in March, and there was there was an IMAP seminar, actually. One of the senior ASIC people presented and said, well, you know, they'd done their 12 or 18 months of field work. There was really nothing significant that came out of that for them in terms of specific issues they had to address. So we're not really expecting any more action from ASIC around that. So I think they wanted to see just how managed accounts were being used in the market, and they were relatively satisfied by all accounts with what they found. The question that they haven't resolved finally on is this issue of regulatory capital, and whether they will require MDA operators to have regulatory capital at some point in future. And if they do, then, well, you know, the whole issue about, well, is that in addition to platform capital if the MDA is being run on a platform, or is it if it's on a platform, will it be necessary? You know, you'll have all those issues that will presumably emerge. But yeah, I think by and large they have sort of had a look and said no, they're reasonably happy with the what they've seen as they've delved inside different businesses and understood how they're operating these things.
Thank you, Brett. Maybe a question to Isaac. What support is there for advisors to communicate what is actually going on inside the portfolio? Manager changes, market movements up and down. What support do you think is important to provide advisors that are utilising different solutions and implementation choices?
Yeah, I mean, I think different advisory groups and different businesses will want different levels of communication and support. But there's stuff that will be required at a minimum, I think. And if you think back to that wheel of the governance framework that I had, there's performance reporting and monitoring, and that's a really critical part. So that includes things like having a monthly performance report. People should know whether or not you're adding value as an asset consultant, for example, on a month-by-month basis. It should be very clear and very transparent. And you know, Zac mentioned that in his clock there. The transparency level should be very high in our view. Alongside that, obviously, when you're taking discretionary control of the portfolio, there can be changes within the portfolio to managers or dynamic asset allocation changes, and they can happen in real time. You're not necessarily waiting for a quarterly rebalance as you might have for a more traditional strategic asset allocation only portfolio. And so that means it's incumbent on providing real-time commentary and reviews of those decisions and those changes, so that the business and so the clients are aware that you've made a change, and they can monitor if that's adding value or detracting value, or whether it's following the governance processes and the governance frameworks that are being implemented. And that's really critical. So, you know, there's a couple of pieces there that I think come through at a minimum. I also think that providing some market commentary that is useful, usable, relevant, and helpful is pretty important. And you know, for example, that shouldn't necessarily be 20 pages of economics every month, but distilling something down that is relevant to what's happening in the portfolio and relevant to how that portfolio is being managed is really important. And so you end up with a suite of commentaries, if you like, that might come out weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually, and between them give everything that is required to the advice business itself in order to work with their client and ensure them that they're, you know, make sure they're comfortable that the process is being run well.
Thanks, Isaac. Well, we're just about out of time. We've got about 1 minute left. I want to take the opportunity to thank IMAP, Toby and Jenny and the team for putting on the webinar series. It's been a fantastic opportunity for us to communicate some of the key issues that we think in helping to improve governance for your clients and your practice, but also the different implementation choices that are available. And today, thank you very much to Zac, to Brett and to Isaac for another insightful presentation. I think you'll find there's lots of information that is available. It is important to take the time and reflect on what's relevant to you and your practice. After this session, what we'll be looking to do is provide you a checklist which will help you with those questions around how to get started. Obviously, you can reach out and talk to any of us, and we'll also have that governance white paper. But thank you, everyone, today. And Toby, thank you for...
Shane, thank you very much for hosting both of these webinars. So to the presenters for today and to Matt Heiner as well from Monday. Next week, we'll be running a series of 3 webinars focused on including international equities in managed account portfolios and some of the considerations that gives rise to. We're focusing on 3 specific areas. First, the series will be moderated by Nathan Lim, Head of Wealth Management or Head of Portfolio Construction in the Wealth Management Division of Morgan Stanley. Morgan Stanley were the winners of this year's IMAP Licensee Award. And I'm looking forward to Nathan hosting these. The first of the webinars will focus on implementation issues and considerations around including global equities in a managed account portfolio. So we'll be looking at the options that are available and some of the considerations and choosing among those. The second webinar on Wednesday will focus on macroeconomic themes and the way these might be incorporated into decisions about investing in global equities. And the final on Friday will focus on stock picking for global equity portfolios run from Australia. You'll all be receiving information on those, and I look forward to you joining us next week. So thanks for participating today. Thank you to our presenters, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.